I'm here to talk about Twitter and developing into Twitter. I think there's a number of companies here who have developed into Twitter. I know Wayne's over there, again, Low-Hi Labs. But I'm just here to showcase some of the things that are possible from a developer's perspective. Let's see if there we go. And the way that we kind of frame it is talking about connecting to the pulse of the planet through integrating with Twitter. Really briefly about me, can people see this screen for what that's worth? Kind of, sort of, hopefully so. A little bit about me, just really briefly to give some background. I graduated with a computer science degree eons and eons ago. I graduated, and my first job actually out of school was at a small startup called Salesforce. And I had a phenomenal run, 8 years there. I was able to work with some amazing people, build the API, and so really get my feet wet in terms of building platforms. My mentor, who is the CTO, Dave Molinoff, had always told me about how his background, both in tech and having gotten an MBA, was fundamental to him to understand the business and the value of technology. So I then went to MIT for my business degree. If anyone here is ever interested in applying for business school or what that whole rigmarole is about or what value there is in that, I'm happy to talk about that. Following that, I actually met my co-founder for a fashion startup because I wanted to do something other than enterprise software. We launched, we had pretty good traction, and we were fortunate enough to hang out with Paul Graham, Gary Tan, and the whole YC group. If anyone is interested in that experience or kind of what that's about, I love talking about that and even putting you in touch with them for conversations. They just love meeting entrepreneurs and love hearing great new ideas. And then shortly after that, I had an opportunity to join Twitter in developer advocacy. And given all the things that have been so fortunate to do, Twitter, with its people, with kind of the mission of what we believe, has been one of the greatest jobs that I've had. Shameless plug, we are hiring. We have an office in Boulder. We have an office in San Francisco and other places. If you like to travel, feel free to reach out if that's of interest to you, and happy to chat about that. So enough about me. When I come out and I talk to developers about the Twitter platform, there are typically 3 questions that I get over and over again. And I guess I've framed this discussion really around those 3 discussions, or those 3 questions that I get. The first that I typically get is, why should I build into Twitter? So as a developer, what's the value proposition for me? Why should I do it? How does it work? Number 2 is, how do I build into Twitter? Sure, there's a bunch of people on Twitter. There's a bunch of people talking about stuff. Well, how do I actually harness that for my integration, for my app, for my website, build a business around it? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And the last piece with developers is always, show me. What can I do? How long will it take? And give me something to start with. So I hope to cover these 3 things and then maybe field a couple of questions afterwards. Cool? All right. So the first question regarding why should I build into Twitter? From both a company perspective as well as a developer perspective, there are 3 things that we really value about Twitter, and hopefully I can just share those with you. First off, we feel that Twitter enables global distribution for individuals who are just trying to talk about something or get the word out. If you're an app developer and you want to get your app well known and downloads and so forth, Twitter is an amazing platform for a lot of those things. And so, I don't know, if you happen to be a football team and you want to show live actual touchdowns happening and maybe even include the fans through a Vine, it's a great channel for engaging your audience, engaging your fans on our platform. If you happen to be a kid who just ran into the Pope, it happens to be a pretty good place to take a selfie, show it to your 200 follower friends and maybe another 20 million people who just think that's a pretty awesome thing that happened. And with regards to media and journalism, a lot of breaking news happens on Twitter. So this image right here is the unfortunate crash at SFO for Asiana Airlines, which actually broke on Twitter. The thing I like to highlight about this particular example is that David Un, who posted this, actually was using a social media app called Path. How many people have called Path? I've heard of Path. Cool. So you share with your followers or your small network there, and then you opt in to share it with Twitter. It shows up here on Twitter. And then, again, through global distribution, 40, 50 different websites actually took this tweet, embedded in their website, USA Today, CNN, and shared out with their audience. That doesn't actually even include people who don't typically embed tweets, and so they'll do a screenshot, pop it into their website. And it also doesn't include the number of people who, the number of TV and broadcasters who then took this tweet, and it was the seminal photo from this crash in every single media news story around the world. So again, Twitter is a place for global distribution if it's content, if it's media, and then getting into mobile apps. So given the fact this is a startup thing and we like to talk about mobile developers, this is the Spotify app. And I will throw my hand up there and say that I love Iggy Azalea. So these are my screenshots from my use case. Absolutely true. I changed your life. Anyway, so you listen to the song, and then with one tap, Spotify has the ability to just share that. So I can share with my friends, maybe who work at Beats, that, hey, I'm listening to this, so you should go listen to it too. And it appears on Twitter through our Twitter Cards platform with the content, as well as a little bit of additional information and the opportunity to open that in the Spotify app. And so that in itself is an interesting use case. But it's more interesting when you then go onto Twitter and you do a search for a hashtag Spotify. When you do this, you see my tweet up top with what I'm sharing, but then you see all the other people who are doing it. And so when I had done this 16 seconds, 17 seconds ago, 46 seconds ago, 55 seconds ago, and page of just people sharing your content. So you can get the word out about your app pretty easily by integrating very seamlessly with Twitter. Right? I think that those to share onto Twitter through a mobile app is like 5 lines of code. And then you go the other way, and maybe someone clicks on my tweet, sees this, and if they do not have the app actually installed, then the button actually says, download this app. So we'll drive traffic to download your app from that sense if you have great content that people are sharing. And then if someone clicks on it, we actually just open up the Spotify app right into that piece of content, and people are being re-engaged. So for mobile application developers, both the story of distribution, installation, and then re-engagement happens on Twitter. Another great partner that I've been able to work with. How many people here have worked with 3 cents or have heard of 3 cents? If you haven't, that guy right there is the founder, and I was put in touch with someone else from Twitter, and they just have this amazing app. I'll walk you through it really quickly. 3 cents, instant opinions, instant really social polling. So we were fortunate to have them integrate with Twitter, really simply connect, and then you can create these really simple polls. So asking your friends, what should we eat for lunch? So beef tartare, fried oysters, maybe that's my friends in San Francisco, and I'm throwing in the McDonald's chicken nuggets. Pick photos really quickly, and then you post it. You post it to your friends via SMS, via email, and then on Twitter. And so very quickly, clicking done, and then it shows up on my timeline again. What should we eat for lunch? People click on the link, have the opportunity to vote, and then when I go back into the app, I can see the results. Beef tartare, fried oysters, beet salad, and luckily we're having chicken nuggets. And Connor also was able to, so in this particular one that I did a little while ago, 52 votes, and then you see where these votes are actually coming from. So really quick, lightweight social polling, seeing a bunch of stuff coming from Twitter, and a great use case of getting distribution and engaging people with what you're doing on our platform. Just some quick numbers. These might be a little out of date. 255 million users, active users on Twitter, 550 million tweets every single day. So these conversations that are happening that you can get access to, which we'll talk a bit about later. And 77% of the users are actually outside of the United States. So we have a great mobile footprint, a great global footprint for anyone who wants to use our data and see what's going on in the world. The other value proposition that we like to talk about at Twitter is that Twitter is the shortest distance between your users and their interests. So if you have 255 million people talking on a regular basis, they're sharing information, they're sharing content, and they're discussing, it's a great place to find other people whom you can find your way into the stream of their conversations for engagement or for app downloads or what have you. So if you happen to be into movies, there are 2 million people, practically 2 million people here who are looking at stuff that's happening with the Oscars and engaging with these actors and actresses. If you're into science and say you happen to be watching the Cosmos series, NASA and all these TV shows have amazing content that's being distributed for the first time through the Twitter platform. And you'll find, again, audiences who love science and love geeking out as much as I do, maybe as much as I do. And if you're into sports, and I'm going to guess that this crowd with the Broncos is very much into sports, you can find content coming from the actual sports stars, from the professional handles themselves. So the breaking news happens here. And again, there are audiences here who are following, engaging, and finding a way into that conversation is what Twitter is all about. Another interesting use case, and these are mobile. We're going to show a couple of other ones in a bit. But you can then use the data, use the connections, use this information to bootstrap applications and to bootstrap users into your experience. So here's an app called Overcast. And Overcast has a podcasting listening service where on the right-hand side, you say, I'm new to Overcast, or you have an account. You log in. And through the flow, you can actually link your Twitter account. It then says, get recommendations from people that you know or follow on Twitter. You do that really quickly. It thinks for a second. And then all of a sudden, an entirely new user like myself suddenly has recommendations from Twitter. That's kind of cool. What does that mean? You click on that. And oh, hey, This American Life was being suggested by Ryan Sarver, who's a guy that I follow, used to work at Twitter. Brian Ellen was a product manager at Twitter, and he's listening to Planet Money podcast. And so you can bootstrap your interests or what your interests may be from your social groups into your app based on your Twitter preferences. And you can imagine with these 550 million tweets that are global and public, you can get access to it and really personalize and customize applications. So for me, you just tap on This American Life, you download, listen, and you're on your way. The last thing that we like to talk about when it comes to Twitter is that it's open and then it's real time. We feel that we have this network where you can latch on and just get streams and gobs of information, and it's a very open platform. Anyone here who has a little bit of technical background can download some API keys, can use one of our sample codes to just get going and then start reading data, because it's all out there and we want it to be open and people to use it effectively. So this is one of my favorite visualizations that we have around the office. We take tweets and we show them happening in real time across the globe. It also gives us, as employees of Twitter, that sense and that presence of this is what's happening, this is why we do it, to enable these kinds of conversations. And this is done with Vine, which we also love. You can also take this massive amount of data and find interesting associations, correlations of the data, how people are talking, and how the world is connected. In the Middle East, there's obviously a lot of activity where Twitter has been used. And so during that time, this company called Electionista built a map of the countries in the Middle East, Lebanon, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, mapped out the people who live in those areas or who are influential in those areas. And so those circles actually say how big their influence or activity is, and connected them with lines with how they've interacted, how they've talked, how they've followed each other. And so you can see some interesting things emerge as you look at this data over time, or you just look at how Twitter is being used and how that represents the conversations that we're enabling through our platform. So hopefully that's giving you an idea of why you may want to build into Twitter. If you have other opportunities or other things that you're thinking about, I'm happy to chat about them or connect afterwards. But distribution at a global scale, if you're a publisher, if you're an application developer, if you're just building a simple website, it's a good place to start. You can connect users with your interests. If you can find those interesting conversations and become a part of them. And number 3, we're open in real time, and so our data is there for you to help understand what's going on in the world or even show interesting visualizations. I know there's a company, Wayne, right there that does amazing visualizations for a lot of the stuff that we work on, so we're very thankful for the guys that you guys are able to show that's on top of our platform. The next question, this is going to get a little bit more geekier, but I'm a geek, is how do I build into Twitter? So we're actually getting a little bit more into the details. I like to start with first principles or building blocks here, and so you have the first tweet from Jack Dorsey, our founder, right? His first tweet, if you guys have seen it, just setting up my Twitter. How many people, just out of curiosity, are actually on Twitter? And if you're not, don't, oh, wow. That's awesome. Thank you so much. I think I go to a lot of places and a lot of people are not on Twitter, and I think that just shows us how much more we have to do to make it more relevant to everybody who is in the world. And so it's great to see that in Denver you guys are loving it as much as we do. Hopefully loving it as much as we do. So here you have Jack Dorsey with his tweet, 140 characters. Seems really simple. Seems like it's not that much. As a developer, what do I do with this? As you start to break this apart and you look at it through our API, you realize that 140 characters is actually 4 kilobytes of information, right? In this, you have the tweet, the information that you saw. You have a link to Jack Dorsey's photo. You have other links that people might have shared. You have a little profile information about Jack Dorsey. You have people who followed it or favorited this. And so you're actually given a pretty sizable amount of information all just in that one tweet, right? One of our APIs, which is the REST API, allows you to create tweets, delete tweets, list tweets, look at followers, look at friends, and do a lot of the transactional stuff to understand who a person is and how they may want to interact with the rest of the community on Twitter. If you go a step further, you then take each of these 140 character, 4 kilobyte tweets, and you start using them through the streaming API. And so the streaming API is basically a way to say, hey, latch on to a percentage of the fire hose, 1% of the fire hose, and hold on, because then you start seeing 4 kilobytes like this, right? And it's actually super easy to do that. You just do get this URL with some token stuff, which I could help with, and you'll start just pulling that down. 1% of the fire hose, 550 million, so it's 5.5 million tweets. And that turns out to be a statistically significant sample for anything that you want to do. And a lot of people come and say, hey, I don't want just 1%. Trust me, you want just 1% to get started. These guys can attest to it, I hope. It's more than enough information to get started and to wrap your brain around and to look at and say, hey, I'm taking up way too much AWS storage than I could ever use right now. So other useful things is we have this filter endpoint where you can specify, I want to follow this user or this hashtag bounded by this geolocation, and you'll get that same stream, but specific to that filter. Super helpful if you want to have, obviously, location-based stuff. And then if you really, really, really want to see all of the tweets, we have a Firehose endpoint. It does require a business deal, which really just means we want to make sure that we're helping you use it and you're not misusing it for the purposes of just tons and tons of data coming at you. We've also acquired Twitter, what is now Twitter Boulder, which is GNIP, and they can provide access to this as well. So there's definitely tons and tons of information if you guys want to build into it, want to understand how to do this programmatically, and we're happy to get you started. And just a rounder kind of view of the APIs. We talked about the REST APIs. We talked about the streaming APIs. We have Twitter cards, which is how you're able to see that Spotify in the actual Twitter app. From a mobile perspective, we're building, and we've acquired some companies like Crashlytics and Mopubs that help mobile developers become better mobile developers through crash analytics, reporting, understanding how many times your app dies in the field, and then being able to fix those issues, push them out through another product that we have is Beta, which is, allows you to do test distribution. And then we also have Mopub, which helps mobile developers monetize through our platform. Anyone here use Bootstrap or familiar with Twitter Bootstrap? Cool. There's a nerdy crowd in here, definitely. I see some smiles. Had some conversations about it last night. Twitter Bootstrap was built by Twitter and has kind of taken flight. It's its own thing. It has saved me and enabled me in all my other startup failures that I've had. So it's just so great and easy to use. That's the most notable or well-known open source library that we have. We have a couple of other ones that might be useful, different audiences, but happy to share information about those. And then if you want to create your first app, you just go to t.co/apps and get started basically with a click of a button. So all of that is good, and there are some good examples in there. And there are some examples that my team, as the developer advocacy team at Twitter, have built that I just want to show really quickly. Number one is kind of a streaming demo. So we'll cut over to this really quickly. And let's see. Is it presenting? Can you guys see it OK? Yeah. Cool. So just really quick background. And one of our developers, over a weekend in preparation for a hackathon, used Node.js, HTML5, WebGL, and I'm a troglodyte. I'm old. I don't get a lot of these terms and whatnot anymore. But he took a week. He tells me to say these things. He whipped this up in literally a weekend in Node.js, almost to prove to me how easy it was to do. And so you see him reading the stream, the tweets that are actually happening live. Obviously, they're streaming at you through this globe to show where they are located. And again, this is just a small percentage of it. And then just for giggles, he showed what's trending and the actual tweet sentiment. Just because he had an extra hour to run it through a filter to say, is this a positive tweet or negatively charged tweet, and get a read of what the world was saying. This is actually all open because our team is trying to enable developers not just to be developers into Twitter, but to get started with development. So if you go to github.com/twitterdev, you'll find this code sample. And again, I don't know anything about Node.js, sadly, but There's a README. You go ahead and git clone it, follow the instructions, in 5 minutes you have it going. So we're just trying to get developers to be comfortable with it, and obviously use the Twitter stream, the Twitter data for interesting purposes. So that's one example. And then, let's see. I think you might have seen it on the way in. You might have seen it on the way in, but we had a integration that I did. It did not take 2 days. It took a little longer. But we were asked to join the San Francisco Music Hackathon, which had Beats, Spotify, and it was kind of strange because you have all these great, awesome music streaming, music companies all working together. And I see a lot of that actually here, where all these companies are just coming together and sharing best practices. Anyway, they were there. Beats had launched a new HTML5 audio player. And so they said, what could you do with it? And so as you walked in, you might have seen, if you tweet to @rchoi, we treat those @mentions as a playlist, and it'll find the first one, look it up using the Beats search API, and just play it right through a web browser. And then when it's done, it favorites it and then goes on to the next one. I use this for barbecues, and so when people say that, like I was saying before, that they don't like the music, I'm like, it's all on you guys. And then they sign up for Twitter. So those are kind of two things that we hack on, that we kind of play with just to see what people like to do or to enable developers to get started. We also spend a little bit of time in developer advocacy trying to align how people can use Twitter or how people have conversations on Twitter with big companies and their goals. And so Starbucks a little while came to us and said, hey, we want to use it in a really novel way. We want to find an interesting way, not just maybe showing tweets of what people have loved. And so we were able to sit down with them and implement this campaign called Tweet a Coffee. And so really, it's as simple as me doing @tweetacoffee to any one of you. And if you come by and chat, I'm happy to tweet a coffee to you guys. And so it looks like this. Tweet a coffee to Brian Bloom at a conference I was at earlier. And almost immediately after, Starbucks replies and says, hey, Brian, Ryan just tweeted you a coffee. Redeem it now. Here's the URL. You click on it. You have to connect your Twitter account to your Starbucks account. Some people don't want to do that, full disclosure. But if you do, it's $5 basically in your Starbucks account right there and then. And so you can see Starbucks loves this because it's enabling a conversation, it's following in the stream of what people do, and it's bringing in revenue, $5 at a time. And lastly, here's a real quick example of a company called Bluefin Labs that we actually did acquire using the Twitter streaming data and making that relevant to television. I don't know if you'll be able to hear the audio. We'll give it a shot. And if not, I can just talk through it. Or you can just cut the audio and I'll talk through it. Yeah, if you want to just cut the audio. So they're talking about the Super Bowl, Giants versus the Patriots, and saying, hey, people are tweeting about it. You know, Twitter is the real-time conversation about an event. And it's not just a couple of people. It's 13.4 million people actually talking about Twitter as the event is happening, with an escalation because towards the game, people are getting more excited and talking about things. Bluefin was then able to segment it, isolate commercials, isolate important events, and then correlate tweets to those actual commercials, to events, and say, hey, people are talking about your commercial, talking about your brand, talking about important moments in the show. So here you say, first touchdown, here's the conversation about it with the peak and the trailing. And then as it continues, unless it's, oh, there you go. Here are the 1.2 million tweets about commercials. I don't know if you guys have followed around the partnership that we have with Nielsen's, but Nielsen's is this rating system that shows how people are engaging or watching your show / watching the commercials, right? Because if you can prove that 10 million people are watching your show, you can also prove that 10 million people are watching your commercials. We can go a step deeper by saying they're actually talking about your commercials. They're actually watching it. They're not turning around, flipping it off, watching the Puppy Bowl. They're talking about your commercial. And by the way, kind of like we showed earlier, but more intelligently, they can say what the conversation, if it's positive, it's negative. And so that's Bluefin Labs showing that Twitter is key to real-time conversations for sports and for other television shows. So ultimately, I'm here as a developer advocate, and if anyone here wants to implement with Twitter or wants to get started or just wants to understand a little bit more, I'm here to help. My colleague Lauren there is also here to help. She's from GNIP, but also now part of Twitter Boulder. Again, we have GitHub, Twitter Dev. If you just go there, You'll find a ton of code samples in Rails, in Python, I believe in iOS and Android, just to get you started with lots of streaming, REST-based things, whatever it is that you want to do. If you don't have an example, I'm happy to try to find one for you. There's also this other thing that you can use called Google, and you have Twitter API libraries, and you'll find a plethora of people who in every single language have implemented Twitter in that programming language. Scala, Python, Java, maybe not Basic. And then I'm sure there's like at least 60 of them in Ruby on Rails. That's my little dig. Sorry, guys. And then just feel free to reach out to me at rchoi or rchoi at Twitter, and I'm happy to help you or your engineers along, see what you can do. That's all the scheduled or kind of scripted content I have, and I can take a couple questions, or we can just have people take t-shirts and chat afterwards. Yes, question?
How do you get the sentiment in your example there? Where does that come from?
Great question. So there are a bunch of open source libraries, NLTK being one of the best ones, and having a implementation in Python. So if you just go on Google and you look for sentiment analysis libraries, you'll find a bunch of them. MLTK is the one that I've used the most and had the most success with. They do some pretty fascinating things where they actually have taken a bunch of data from either Fandango or some movie source and kind of manually said, this one is positive, this one's negative, this one's positive, this one's negative. It creates what's called the corpus of data that then when a new one comes in, you just have to match and pattern match based on terminology, based on Markov chain kind of word phrases to say, hey, maybe not with 100% accuracy, but this one tends to be more positive, this one tends to be more negative. And so this thing can be a continuous learning engine. Every time you hear about AI, this is almost the inception of AI, of these systems that learn over time. Thank you. Yes?
What kind of location data do you pass back to developers based on each tweet? Do you give them cheat coordinates of where it was sent from or anything like that?
That's a good question. So the question is, what kind of location data do we have on each tweet? If users have location services enabled on the app, you can actually get geo. And then in some cases, if they've tagged a certain place, we also have a thing called places in our API, which has a bit more of a free-form structure. But typically, people put in address. They put in the name of the place if it's a Starbucks or something. And it's a little bit more free-form. But you can have both the geolocation as well as a place. Cool. Other questions or anything developer-related? Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for making the time. Feel free to stop by and chat with myself or Lauren. And thank you guys so much and for Denver Startup Week and for Connor for hosting us. It's been phenomenal. I appreciate it so much.